Hello, welcome to Localization Today, where we explore how language, technology, and community converge to unlock ideas for everyone, everywhere. I'm Eddie Arrieta, the CEO here at Multilingual Media. Today, we're diving into one of the most transformative shifts in localization, the rise of AI to check and fix AI or trigger human intervention to scale multilingual content without sacrificing quality. Our guest, Adam Bittlingmayer, is a CEO and co-founder of Modelfront, a company leading this new frontier. Modelfront's AI predicts which machine translations can safely skip human editing, enabling companies to translate more content at the same human quality. Their mission is bold: to make more content available in more languages for the billions of people who can't yet access it on their own. Adam, welcome and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Adam, when we were preparing, I thought, okay, the questions are great, but I cannot forget this last sentence where we are considering the part of your mission that is really bold, right? Which is to make content available in more languages for the billions of people who can't yet access it. How did you come across that problem of the billions of people not accessing content? How do you see it, or how did it come about to pay attention to that specific gap?
So if you kind of go back to sort of old school Silicon Valley, like 2000s era, right? Google, make the world's information accessible and useful. Remember when there never used to be like any geofencing on any website? It didn't matter where in the world you were from, right? That was kind of like the early dream of the internet, right? We're all equals. Nobody knows you're a cat, right? Mm-hmm. And then, time went on, we got a little bit more locked down, right? And I was, working in Silicon Valley, and there the perception is that basically everybody can understand English, machine translation's working fine, et cetera, et cetera. I even kind of thought that, right? Even though I was, working in Google Translate, right? Working in Google. But then it turns out when you actually do the math, right, and you just think of your own family, you think, more people know English than they did before, et cetera, et cetera. You actually go look at the statistics. 1.5 billion people tops kind of understand English, native, non-native, right? Half native, half non-native speakers understand English. And that was basically the first, 1.5 billion people who got the internet. And sort of all the growth beyond that has been people who don't understand English, right? And so these are just statistics on how many, there's around 8 billion people on Earth now, and 1.5 billion who understand English. And it's surprisingly constant because this is another topic, but English is catastrophic for birth rates. Once you start speaking English, you stop having kids. So it just kind of stays constant. Even though people keep learning English, there's just more people who don't understand English who are being born.
That is incredible, the scale of the challenge and how it multiplies over time. And we see it. We are paying close attention to indigenous languages and also young languages. We've come across languages like Bamum, 120-year-old language, and it's got a phonology and orthography that is changing over time. And I've mentioned this story in many places, but yeah, it's crazy how it's evolving so quickly. You cannot even get to catch it seems. But it's a beautiful.
These are moving
challenge.
Targets.
Yes. So this inspires Modelfront. So what's the story behind Modelfront? How did the idea come about, and the problem, of course, that we're talking about here?
Yeah, so I was working in Google Translate, which had been part of Google Research and Google Search, and as you know well, and a lot of folks know, right? Basically, Gen AI started in translation. It started in those circles, actually, inside of Google. This transformer model architecture, the T in GPT, was invented there around 2017, and effect neural machine translation a few years prior, right? And it wasn't just a research thing; it rolled out very quickly into production. And the translation industry sort of shifted from translating from scratch to basically editing the output of AI, right? Basically the same thing that's happening to me as a programmer and you as a journalist now, or both of us CEOs, right? Chief email officers, now we're finally shifting to editing AI output. But for translation and translators, that happened a long time ago, starting as early as the earliest I've heard was 2001, 2002 at Sun in Silicon Valley. And so what you would expect right? What I expected even as a guy who worked on this stuff was like, wow, generation quality just got like radically better, right? I mean, we all agree, even the biggest critics of AI, of machine translation, agree that it was worse, 20 years ago. So they agree that it was, got a lot better. So if you're like, you know, let's say a large buyer, you're, one of some Fortune 500, you spend whatever, $10 million a year on translation, you'd think like, wow, I'm going to get way more for my money for this like high quality content. And that didn't happen. So one thing, what did happen as at the low quality end, if you go to, these people around the world, and they didn't have any translation before. Now they can get some kind of translation on their cheap Android phone, right? And they're better than nothing, right? And so they're very happy. And that was sort of like what I played a small part in, previously, right? So I was at Android, then at Google Translate, and at Google Translate, I was also maintaining that Google Chrome, Google Translate integration that fires every time, somebody around the world who's not on an iPhone, which is most of them, open a web page that's not in their language, which is most web pages, right? Super cool, great for humanity. I make no apologies for that, by the way. But if you actually go to like a high quality document, say like a technical doc or a patent or a product description, right? Or even let's say like the articles that you guys put out, right? Which are more high quality, unique content, it doesn't actually enable very much. Like it didn't shift to the point that even multilingual media says, okay, you know what? We're going to have everything in Spanish. I'm talking Spanish again. I'm not talking boom boom, right? It didn't get to that point because it's still really, really, really slow and expensive, right? And so that's the point where, us AI guys got to look ourselves in the mirror and say, all right, why not? Right? Like there's something here that isn't as we thought it was, right? Because we all would have assumed that if you just keep making generation quality better, eventually you're going to crack this thing, or at least you're going to help really, really, really accelerate how people produce this content.
That is really an interesting take. And you were saying earlier, of course, that hybrid translation, at least of the conversation, we're talking about hybrid translation. And in that conversation, I was mentioning how a report on the Future of Jobs Survey 2024 by the World Economic Forum, the combination or this hybrid is expected, or this amount of work or jobs done by hybrid right now, it's going to increase from 30 to 33% of the entire size of the pie, if we could put it that way. What role is Modelfront playing in this whole hybrid conversation?
I guess you can say we're right in the thick of it, right? So from my view, basically, yeah, if you what you always had was tons and tons of stuff done by machine translation, right? Even 10, 20 years ago, that volume just exceeded by, orders and orders of magnitude, whatever could go through this slow, expensive human translation pipeline. Yeah. But what you didn't have was the ability to fully automate really any of the human quality content, maybe with one exception. So the translation memory, right? So they say, okay, if something's already been translated once, we're not going to pay for that. That's just going to come from the cache like that. But that was done in the 80s and sort of like stayed till. But for most new high quality content, there's been like, it's sort of hybrid in the sense of that, okay, maybe AI generates it and then someone looks at it. It's hybrid in the sense that there's AI involved, but nothing ever actually skipped humans. Everything still, every single word, if it's content that matters, still had to get a human look at it. And so what we're doing is saying, hey, these machine translations are good, right? Or these ones are bad. And maybe we fix some of them and now they're good. And these ones are bad, still bad, and need to go to a human, right? And so that means that it's hybrid in the sense that some of the content gets looked at and some of the content doesn't. But for the content that doesn't, it really is fully automated. It really actually skipped humans and got published to this Fortune 500's website without any human looking at it before that happened, right? And so that's a quite different kind of hybrid. So yeah, and I would just really stress that the pie is radically growing. There is no shortage of content. There is no shortage of people who can't understand English, and they are growing in the real world like crazy. And they are growing on the internet even faster because they're all the ones coming on the internet now, right? So And they're growing by GDP as well, I should say.
Right. So we have growing frontiers, right? And you have these vast amounts of volume, couldn't get checked for quality to be able to access, let's say, markets, to put it that way, to access
Right,
people.
right, right.
Now, vast amounts of that content gets accessed by people, which in turn is going to generate many more interactions, very likely, and exchanges in disparate languages. What are the bottlenecks that you foresee coming to continue solving this, right? Because
Mhm.
I presume then those memory, those translation memories need to be updated, need to continue growing. You need linguists to really like
Right.
be hand in hand with this. I was just seeing a video about how OpenAI hire all these therapists, hundreds of them, just to train the model because people are accessing ChatGPT in distress, and then the system was basically hallucinating all the time, and then sending people to like their deaths. And then they saw an opportunity to
Right.
train the model to make it a lot better, right? So it feels to me, of course, that this is a it must have some cycles for reinforcement, cycles for growth, and I'm
Of
trying to think
course.
what the bottlenecks would be in
Right.
this path.
So that's very true, right? So all of the labs spend, more on data labeling, basically from experts. They don't want trash data, right? So they spend on high quality experts. They want high quality data, which is then police double checked, et cetera, and still often has problems, right? But they spend money on that data. It's called reinforcement learning with human feedback, right? And those budgets are probably bigger than a lot of the translation budgets and translation company revenues, right? So that's how you build good models, right? You have human feedback and continued fine tuning on that. However, there is a big question about like who's going to be controlling that, right? So essentially, if you're a translation buyer, if you just go, okay, I'm going to trust everything to GPT, then they're the ones sort of deciding what those terms should be, how translation output should be, et cetera. Whereas what I think is probably like a little bit more what a buyer wants is that the buyer is the one doing that labeling according to their, labeling, editing, et cetera, according to their style guide. Basically, they're the ones giving the feedback and doing the monitoring of what's outputted because they're, nobody can know what your product should be called other than you, right? In Spanish, let's say. So that's kind of so now when you talk about the future, well, there are the translation departments who are going to embrace that and do that and be the one who kind of controls how their models behave, right? And be the ones who provide the data to their models and evaluate which vendor they should get the models from and all of that. And there are, let's be real, translation departments where like the people cannot just make this jump, right? And they're going to be replaced by new people who can. That you can see it happening, right? So I can't predict the future. I'm just talking about what's already happening now.
Yeah, in fact, I was telling someone at a meeting today, at another panel today earlier, that I was replaced by AI Eddie. I'm AI Eddie. This one knows how to use AI. I replaced the one from 3 years ago that's no longer exists.
Right.
So it was already replaced, by the way. And I think a lot of people are taking up to the challenge. Maybe something that can and I have many questions, and I'm not sure I want to get into the future of work and how people should be looking at their careers. That I think people should discover very quickly. Like we're moments where like we're very fortunate to have many tools to be able to kind of like understand how you like inflict change and growth in your life. So it's like getting there seems to me like almost disrespectful to certain people. So I'd say one thing that's also interesting to me in this whole transition and people changing like functions and like what they do and transforming their careers, it's trying to understand like what's evolving in the elements that allowed for translation to happen like this, for translation to be automated. So when it was human, of course, there were so many steps and so many manual clicks that you had to do to get a project going from input to
Hmm.
output,
Hmm.
and now it's simplified. It almost feels to me like that image that you see when they compare the different rockets from SpaceX, when you have all these cords all messed
Right.
up, and then you see the latest model, and it's just like much more simplified, much more efficient. But the elements are there somehow. So in the perspective of Modelfront, whatever you can tell us about, what are those like elements, constituent elements of this job that have been simplified and allow for this level of efficiency to be even possible or exist?
Mhm. So yeah, I would say that there's a ton of stuff that goes into the process. For example, like getting the data, getting the content out of the CMS and designing projects to people and all of this stuff. And that I can't stress enough how important that stuff is, right? And if you don't have that working, you probably shouldn't be talking about AI yet, and you probably shouldn't be on stage, at industry conferences telling other people about AI. But what Modelfront does is then specifically only that actual core workflow part, right? So when you have, okay, I have a machine translation already generated inside of this project, and we want to know which segments, need a human to look at them and which don't. So we're very myopically focused on what you can say is the most expensive part, right? And going to what you're talking about, a lot of times you find that the things around that sort of project management are also not very automated, right? And they shouldn't really be done with AI. They should be done with like good old software. But when the part that we focus on was the bottleneck, you didn't have that much incentive to go fix the things before and after, right? It's like, I don't know, booking airlines is not a very pleasant experience. Like booking airfare is not a very pleasant experience, but the reality is that the biggest cost is sitting for 10 hours on a plane, right? So you don't have that much incentive to fix these things. But if you made the plane rides, like, I don't know, twice as fast, or maybe like 100 times as fast, all of a sudden you'd think a lot more about, what a pain it is to get through security, right? So, and that's not what we focus on, but I think that's why all of a sudden there's a little bit more focus on those things as well.
How complex is it getting in the content that you are designing? Because I assume it's an ever growing list of things that don't need human intervention. As you've progressed, I presume new things are coming that become easier to predict that they are good to go, right? So I'm
Mm-hmm.
trying to think about like those use cases, or let's say successes of successful publishers that you have seen there, the ones that you can talk about, to get a
Sure,
sense
sure.
of what are the things that don't need humans, but that's still complex in perhaps how it is conceived to be executed at high stakes is, I guess, what I'm
Sure.
looking for.
Right. So probably you've seen content that was actually like approved by Modelfront, and you just didn't know it, right? So technical docs for some of the Fortune 500s, a lot of patents. You probably haven't seen those, but a lot of patents in all fields, biotech, machine learning itself, even like AI itself, patents, all chemistry, et cetera, right? All that kind of stuff. The hotel descriptions on the largest booking platform, right? So travel booking platform, right? So all that kind of content is going through Modelfront. But I would stress that, Farfetch, they've spoken at Local, right? So the top luxury fashion marketplace, right? I would stress that it's used for all sorts of content, right? Patents to luxury fashion is a pretty wide span. However, the percentages within those content types is very different, right? So what you're typically going to see is that for some kind of e-commerce content, you can automate a very high rate of that content. That content is easier. For some kind of very heavy technical legal content, the rate of automation is much lower, but the value of automating a small percentage of that may be very high. So, there are different ways to look at this. And I think both of them are basically good for humanity. But one way I like to look at it is that some of the stuff that's more of a luxury, figuratively speaking, it's much easier to innovate with those. And then that kind of funds the innovation for the stuff where there's a little bit more bureaucracy
and more complexity. It's got to manage so many moving elements in many cases. I can only think about how policies change, and those change with political climate, and then some of those things could really affect a lot of like this really high value, high stakes content that it's the institutionalization of the world. And
right.
yeah, I definitely believe something like this needs to it's probably it's a whole layer that needs to be covered.
Right.
And yeah.
There, I would say one interesting thing, one big difference between doing generation and what we do. So sort of if I go back to doing unverified generation, right? I know, and me and just a ton of sort of AI engineers out there, you spend your life, you get a little bit higher blue score, generate slightly better output. And you see some inputs and you're just like, I don't know what we could do with this input. It's so ambiguous and hard, and the law might change, as you said, right? And you still got to spit out something. And the great thing about what we do is we're saying we don't have to say what it should be. We just have to, we don't, or go check what the law is currently. We just need to detect that this is something that depends on, let's say, the law changing, right? And reject it. That's incredibly freeing, right? And that's sort of the whole trick here is that if you don't know, don't just guess. Say that you don't know and send it to a human, right?
Yeah.
And so, in that sense, even though, yes, it's very complex, since with our approach, you have the way to deal with that complexity. Say just the fact that this is complex, this sentence is super hairy, we reject it, then you detect the complexity. You don't have to generate the right thing given that complexity. So it's a really a fundamental change in how we build AI.
And it provides a kind of image that I get of a type of dashboard, which that dashboard is specific to every, activity or every, I don't want to say client, but every challenge. And then almost like in that movie where you have the five feelings and then you have all these things that start appearing as the kid grows. Like companies probably add complexity to certain things. Immediately you would say everything that's like, I can imagine the first decision. I'm just playing with it right now. But for
Right.
multilingual would be anything that's social media, human check, everything internal communications, not need
Right.
to check, as
Right.
an
And that
example.
complexity is in the data, right? Because the humans
Mhm.
are, they've been making those decisions and, on average, they are editing those things more, for
And it's,
example.
it's also very freeing for the model that you're suggesting because it puts some of the responsibility on the holder of the model front, on the one that decides to use you, because it's almost like the people that defer responsibility to their large language model. And it's almost in here similar where you're saying you can't defer that responsibility to the layer. You have to think about it as well.
I would counter there. We definitely have a lot of responsibility put on us because, in some sense, we are the last defender. So, in most previous sort of AI rollouts, either they said, okay, this content doesn't matter that much, so we can just roll out without any human checks, or this content matters so much that we're still going to have humans look at every word, in which case, there's not that much responsibility on the AI. Now, in our case, we're telling them which ones need to have a human look at it and which one don't for the relatively high value, high quality content. So there is a ton of responsibility on us. And I think that's why, basically my old team at Google, a lot of other tech companies, translation agencies, TMSs have sort of failed to make this work in the real world because there is like this higher, you have to have people carrying pagers, you have to have a different kind of guardrails, you have to have the whole system set up around it and take that responsibility, which they kind of don't want to do, right? If I'm Google Translator or TMS, I kind of just want to add this feature onto my existing system. It's just one more little checkbox in the roadmap and get on with life, right? And so, to be fair, let's say there is a lot more responsibility
So
on
so
us, and
so
we
would you
we say
say
that explicitly.
no, absolutely. So would you say then that you get involved in the definition, or is the definition of it's predetermined, and then like how is that exchange with the one interested in engaging in
Right.
in in this co-responsibility, if we put it that way?
Great question, right? So yeah, it is primarily defined by them via their data and their style guides and so on. And we try to find any, ambiguities or conflicts there because, a lot of times data is not in sync, right? And ask them then, okay, we see sometimes it's going this way, sometimes it's going that way. Maybe there's some really complicated nuance, right? It depends what day of the week it is or whatever. In that case, we're just going to reject everything, right? Everything should go to humans. Maybe they actually want it this way, and that the other way was, the old way, or people who weren't following instructions. And we said, okay, great, thanks. We'll do our best to make things work that way. Yeah. So that's kind of, they primarily guide it, but that we always have to go in for feedback and get more input.
And that's really interesting, that interaction of like what works and what doesn't work and how you understand what it works. I'm very optimistic about that approach of where you are proactively also almost learning from everything that's going on within the model front ecosystem, right? So I imagine then that there is some way in which you are bringing these learnings to reject things that perhaps were not rejected before to a different conversation. You say, hey, this was rejected in these different instances. Then is your system able to suggest over here, hey, we're rejecting it, check it, because not because something that you did, but something that we've seen anonymously, I don't know, anonymized, I guess. Is that something that happens?
Right. So yeah, we have to be very careful about like we can't transfer any data across customers. Each one gets their own private custom models. But I think there are a lot of learnings, of course, that are across customers. So like an obvious example would be that, for example, short segments are very ambiguous, right? If you just have something without context, we got burnt by that a few times, and then it became the default, across customers. You take a lot of stuff around, let's say, a favorite one of mine is like the time of day, right? And does 9 o'clock mean, sometimes it means 9 o'clock, sometimes it means 21, etc. Right. This kind of stuff, currencies, all the usual places where you get burnt. And I would say this goes back actually far before Modelfront, right? So I had a kind of rabid fascination with translation fails when I was at Google Translate. And sort of my favorite hobby was predicting like only seeing the source input and saying, oh, it's going to mess up on this one, right? And getting a very, very good sense for that. And that stuff hasn't really changed, right? Like it's evolved a little bit, but I think that having that like really, really good instinct is just based on seeing a lot of examples of what can go wrong. And I would say knowing a lot of languages. So I think it's very different when you take like a cross-lingual view and you're able to at least kind of understand 10 or 20 languages. Yeah, and it is kind of the same things that go wrong. And it has like, I think it is, I'd say translation errors are largely way more than people think about the source. Basically, that let's say English is a source, like there's an ambiguity into English. And that ambiguity that's into English is a problem for most target languages because they don't have that ambiguity.
Adam, I thought the elephant in the room, definitely not AI for us, was the whole human quality element of it. It is a bold statement, but as we are discussing it, right, when we start talking about different types of outputs that are very well established and well set, very institutionalized, to put it that way, it seems that it is possible to get a good number of these use cases. Could you give us a sense of like the use cases where you're like, this is 100% going to happen, human quality, and then there is like this other, translating Hamlet that it's like, sure, maybe we'll see type thing, because already there are institutionalization of like types of translation. I see where it could go, but could you give us a sense? You are in it. How does that actually look?
Right. Yeah. So I think like a very good rule of thumb for this is how many translation memory matches there are. So basically, if there's a lot of repeated sentences in the content, it's kind of, or even fuzzy matches, right? So they say history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes, right? So if the content kind of rhymes with what came before, and it's just sort of different remixes of the same thing. So like a product catalog, or like the instruction manual in a car, right? Just year after year after year. Where a lot of it's the same. Even the parts that aren't the same tend to be very similar to what came before. And so automation works better. So if the old automation worked well, the new automation is also going to work well. If you got, let's say, a totally new poem or a novel, as you mentioned, or like boutique marketing strings, right? Just some slogan that's going to go on a billboard in 100 countries, but it's 3 words long, right? In English, that kind of stuff. Even humans don't agree on it. Old school automation didn't work well. I'm the first guy to say, like, why do we talk to each other in different languages? Like, you speak one language, even you and I, or you and your colleague, right? You speak English sometimes and Spanish sometimes, because you actually can't translate this stuff. And you're like a completely different person. I'm the first guy to say there's stuff that's just untranslatable, right? And so that is obviously, not touchable by these approaches. You're not going to get much efficiency there.
Yeah, I really like that question because it really helps scope what we have in front of us in a very clear way. I of course have to also ask you about where you see Modelfront, or how you see Modelfront growing. How does it even position itself in the whole globalization spectrum, and like what companies are looking to do, what organizations are looking to do? Are there any particular verticals that are more interesting or not? Because it seems like for you the sky is the limit. You could really go in a lot of different directions. What do you see right now as that direction?
Right. So there are definitely limits. I'm keenly aware of the limits, right? So like the thing that bothers me a lot, firstly, is that in a lot of cases, the percentage of translations like in that content type that we can actually safely approve is too low, right? Is not where it is in the other areas, right? So, like as I mentioned, like the e-com vertical things work super well, right? But when you get to more technical, high value stuff, the percentages are lower, even though the value may be high. The other thing is, I mean, we turn away buyers weekly because they don't have enough volume, right? So we're not able to provide that level of quality, in small data scenarios or medium data scenarios, let's say. And therefore we don't provide anything because there's no point if you don't provide human quality, right? So those are some of the big limitations here. What I can say in terms of our position is that we're very independent, right? So we have put more resources into this problem than any other company on earth. And I'm including, like Google, Microsoft, Amazon, et cetera, the large translation agencies, et cetera. I don't think that's the only secret here, but like that's part of it. And the reason is because we don't provide machine translation. We don't provide a TMS. We don't provide human language services, and I promise you we never will, right? Nobody needs another human language service. Nobody needs another machine translation engine. Nobody, right? And so those things, and people have those already. They don't need that. And so it's better if we just focus on the one part that we do better than anybody else. And so that's been our position since the start, and that's remained our position, and that's going to remain our position. Yeah, and I think one big limitation here is that a lot of the legacy tools, contracts, people, etc., block companies that they do want to use AI. They do come to us and they want to use this. They're actually blocked when we say, okay, let's go look at your scenario. So first you got to fix this, and this, because you're not even in control right now. So I think when you talk about limitations, there are a lot of limitations right now. Like people just can't get their data out of some dinosaur system, or they can't get out of a contract that's like this, right? So there are a lot of those kind of limitations too, if we're honest.
Very interesting then to know. And then, ¿hablas español?
Un poquito plático, sí.
So you know languages. It's not like you hate languages. You're not evil AI. I never said that. You said it. But
no, I am an evil AI guy. I am. But I'm not only an evil AI guy. También
hablas español.
Quiero a los idiomas. Right. I speak eight languages actually.
Oh,
right?
wow. Which 8 languages do you speak?
English, Spanish, German, Italian, French, Serbo-Croatian, Russian, and Armenian.
Oh, wow. How did you make that connection? How did you, learned all of them?
Just school of life. It was not a plan.
Oh, wow.
So, but yeah, I obviously like it and I live it, right? And my kids live it, right? And I mean, this is kind of what bugs me. Like you're in the same situation, right? I mean, there's just content. I don't know. Your kids probably started learning English now.
Yes, they know English by now.
They do, but they weren't when they were little. They didn't, right? And same thing here. But my oldest one, she starts learning it. The younger ones don't, right? And then you want to share something with them and they don't have access to it. Well, they're in a good position because, their dads are, CEO of some company in the translation business. So they're going to be fine. Right. But you realize what it's like there's a lot of little girls who don't have, if you want to learn to program or you want to watch this podcast right here and they don't have access to it. Right. So this is, it's very personal for me like that. And then I remember when my daughter was learning to code, we started when she was like 6, right? And I don't want to say the name of the, right? Cause it's free. It's a good tool. It helps a lot of kids, right? But like I went in and looked at it in German and the translations were just terrible. Like you couldn't understand it. The only way I could help her is cause like her dad is actually like a programmer who knows what the English was supposed to be that this thing was translated into, right? It was so bad, right? And then we're not talking a long time ago here, right? And so, yeah, this is the kind of thing that motivates the hell out of me. I got to be honest.
And that's great because then talks also about the linguists and where we originally were discussing languages are growing in the numbers of people that speak them and in their complexity and in their nuance and in their culture. So it's that ever growing, evolving in complexity problem that seems to be growing exponentially, and still there's like this these things that are making it a very bottlenecky. It feels very bottlenecky. What role do linguists and would play in it, and what roles do the large language models play in it? Like this automation, we already talked plenty of the automation,
Right,
but
right,
the
right.
linguists, the people that actually understand the culture, that like speak, because you know this and you probably feel this when you speak the languages, then you get to know like culture and jokes and like
Right,
things that you're
right.
like,
And in your
how are
head,
they
you're not
so different?
translating, right?
These
Because things don't
worlds, it's
translate
very
very well.
different
Yeah,
to
yeah,
understand the language than to have like the translation of what they are talking
right.
about. Like it's very different. So what role do you see linguists and the ones that enjoy translation and seeing if the words match or not, or where did they
Mhm.
didn't match, and the taggers,
Right,
I guess, of the future?
right. So I would actually say that I think the linguists were right, basically, about a lot of stuff, and about maybe the most important thing, which is that post-editing AI output is not actually faster if you still have to check every single word. So what happened, right? As I said in the beginning, translation generation got way better, and we all expected these savings, right? And you got this the industry, the supply chain, this like middleman to the middleman to the middleman to the middleman, they all promise these savings, and people inside, companies promise savings to their bosses, et cetera, et cetera. But that didn't materialize because it turns out that if you still have to look at every single word, you're not actually that much faster. So the linguists were right, right? And what then was done was, okay, let's just like squeeze them a little bit. In certain TMSs, they even have the default that they pay you less if you don't edit that translation, even though you spent time looking at it, right? Just kind of like whip these people, squeeze them a little bit, et cetera. And, introduce this light post editing. And by that, we mean look at the same amount of content, but just like, can you go fast, right? And then you look at this data. My co-founder's wife, our CTO, his wife was actually a freelance translator for one of our customers now. And given what I'm about to say, I sure as hell can't say which one. And he was looking at this, and it's like, wow, she leaves like, a lot of these unedited, and then has to edit every, you look, confirm, 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 then edit, confirm, 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 right? And this becomes, your whole day, where you spend 80% of your time is spent on stuff that you don't actually end up editing, right? Which is crazy. And a lot of them were pretty quick to notice this. It was the supply chain, because they're just middlemen. They didn't really notice this. And yeah, so you had this pressure, and their job became just like rushing over stuff and then making very few edits and not really doing a very good job. So you look at the data, and it's has full of mistakes. The people who really actually enjoyed the beauty of the language, they quit, or they shifted to those like boutique things that were under this kind of pressure. And you had a lot of people like, yeah, I'm a translator, who couldn't really translate. And they just like, they accept these conditions, right? And just undercutting each other, et cetera. That's kind of what happened. And what I think Modelfront is doing is actually bringing things back to maybe a little bit more like how they were before, where, okay, we're saying, look, the easy automatable stuff is going to be off your plate. And what you look at is even more important, because it's going to be used to retrain models, to monitor models, police them, right? So please take your time. I'm telling our customers, please tell them, take their time, pay them well for the part that they do look at, right? And the translator, right, for them, they're still fully employed the whole day. It's just the company could do more content, right? So the part that they're going to do is going to back to these interesting parts, like how do you translate that word? That's the first time we've ever encountered this word, right? Rather than fixing, a straight apostrophe to a curly apostrophe for the millionth time this year, right? So I think we're going to shift back to the translators doing that interesting high value work. And on average, the wages and so on are going to reflect that, right? But it's not always a smooth shift, because you have a lot of middlemen. You have a lot of, there are going to be people who get shafted, who lose because of the way the system works, which is, not my mission to change, but it has some problems.
Yeah, and I understand this is also the type of convergence when teams also take the opportunity to reassess, to restructure, to rethink, to realign in visions, to
Right, right.
redo their missions, and it understandably it's hard sometimes to communicate those, And I see challenges in certain companies communicating how they are navigating and communicating that the moment
Right.
that we're going through.
And it's definitely not always fair. I mean, I'm not, again, not predicting the future. I'm talking about
Right.
like what's already happened and what's happening. I see it. It's not always fair who gets laid off or who loses a job because of these things, right? There may be somebody else who's more political, let's say.
Yeah, and I think we understand that part of the conversation. I think this has been a great conversation, Adam. I think we're gonna continue it because I'm gonna be seeing you in Saudi or India.
India.
India. I will see you in
I'm really
India.
looking forward to this, by the way.
This fantastic, and I think there will be some great conversations happening there. Adam, before we go, any final thoughts? And of course, if you're listening to this, you should look for the second part of this conversation. Well, the continuation of this conversation. I'm pretty sure I'll talk to Adam in India, and we'll dig a little deeper into other things that we see over there. Adam, any final thoughts or comments?
Yeah, I can't stress enough how important it is to be in control of your data, your workflows, et cetera, right? If you're a translation buyer. So yeah, I think if you're excited about AI, if you want to do, have the freedom of different moves on the board now, or let's hopefully at least in 6 months, then you really want to make sure that you're in control of everything that you're paying for.
Adam, thank you so much. This has been great. Thank you, everyone else, for listening to Localization today. Again, a big thank you to Adam Bittlingmayer.
Thank you.
Did I butcher it? How was that, Adam? Good?
Bittlingmayer.
Bittlingmayer. I will train a bit more.
Como en español, es lo mismo que no.
Oh, sí, Bittlingmayer, for joining us. Thank you, Adam, and for sharing. Yes, mucho gusto, and thank you for sharing how Modelfront is making human quality translation scalable, accessible, empowering organizations to reach more people in more languages than ever before. For those listening, remember, you can catch new episodes of Localization today on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Subscribe, rate, and share so others can find it. I'm Eddie Arrieta, CEO here, Multilingual Media. Thank you for joining us. See you next time. Goodbye.